everyone. It's Liz from the Barletta team at Liggers, and I am here with Annelie from Best of Boston Living with Century 21. How are you, Annelie?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. I'm excited for this conversation because I know it's one that buyers are not necessarily thinking about, but they should be. So
Right.
why don't you start us off with what we're chatting about today?
Yeah, so today we're actually going to talk a little bit about a final walkthrough. So we're going to focus a little bit more on a buyer's perspective and a buyer's side. And I wanted to, introduce to find out why, number one, a buyer should do a final walkthrough and what's involved in a final walkthrough.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by asking a question from a legal standpoint of view is what happens to a buyer if they conduct a final walkthrough and the property is not in the same condition as it was when we made the offer or had the home inspection?
Yeah. So, great question. So if you go through your walkthrough and there's an issue, I always use I don't know why I use this example, but I always like hole in the wall. I always use the hole in the wall.
Me
Um,
too. Me too.
yeah. So if they're my client, so where we've had the purchase and sale agreement negotiated and we added in language that said that the property is to be delivered as it was at the time of the buyer's inspection, and then walkthrough comes and now there's a hole in the wall. It's awesome because, well, it's not awesome that there's a hole in the wall, but it's awesome because then we have an inspection report to look back on and to say, living room, there's no holes in the walls flagged. So obviously we are not in the same condition as it was at the time of the inspection. Seller, it's your responsibility to fix this. So a couple of things that we can do. Some clients, they're moving out of their apartment. They need to move into this house. They don't have the time to potentially postpone closing. So they want to still close. So in a situation like that, we can negotiate either a holdback of funds, which means that we figure out an amount of money that makes sense to fix this issue, and we take it from the seller's money at closing, and we hold it in an escrow account. And so if we decide to do that, then the seller would be responsible to go fix the issue. Once the issue is fixed, we release their money. Another option that we have is to do a seller credit where the buyer and seller agree on a certain price and they say, I want to do it, buyer wants to do it after we close. I'll take care of it, but give me the money for it. If those two things don't work, the alternative is postponing closing until it's fixed. Some buyers don't have that flexibility. Some buyers do and still don't want to push the closing. So it really just depends on the client, really. But those are really the three kind of things that we would do when we discover a walkthrough issue.
So what happens with the buyer? So let's say, for an instant, there is a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
Um, and I see this often, obviously, where especially when it comes to TV mounts,
Hmm.
right? A lot of people now hang the TVs on the wall and there becomes quite large holes from it. And a buyer says, okay, we will hold money back from the seller's proceeds until the problem is corrected. Now, are the seller required to have it corrected by a professional, or what condition are they required to have it repaired in?
So this is the thing. It's like a gray area, right? Because it's at that point, it's negotiation. It's discussion with the other side of what the expectation should be. Um, if I were on the buying side, it just depends because there's some homeowners that are super handy. If I was buying my father-in-law's house, I'd trust him to do it over anyone else, even though he's not a licensed contractor per se. So there's certain people that, have the ability and the capability to do a great job on it, even though they're not like a licensed. Again, the hole in the wall is tricky. It could be that there's a leak. Obviously, in a situation like that, you want to have a licensed contractor, a licensed plumber be the one who's fixing this leak, for example. So I think it really depends on what the issue particularly is. And sometimes, I know I never like to, but this is the expectation. This is what I think. It's always best to have this expectation. And then if it doesn't happen that way, then it's a more positive experience anyway. So I'd rather think the negative and then it be better, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you have to have the expectation that a seller could say, you know what, I'm not helping, I'm not fixing at all. what happens in a situation a seller says something or what they're willing to give is not what you as a buyer want.
Yes.
That's the tough part because at the end of the day, you want to buy the house, they want to sell the house, but sometimes you just get people who are not cooperative.
Yeah.
And of course, as a buyer, if the condition of the property isn't as it was pursuant to the contract, you have a legal claim to say that the seller's in default. But what do you do if the seller's in default? You want the house, Are you going
Does the
to
buyer have a legal right to walk away?
So the seller in the contract will have that 30-day period or a limitation if the attorney limits it to like when the buyer rate expires, but they would have the ability to say, okay, we're not closing today. We're going to extend until we fix it, pursuant to paragraph 10, that right that they have. And at that point, if at the end of that term, they still haven't fixed it, then they're in default. And what the recourse is, unfortunately, having to sue the seller. But that doesn't help you get the house any sooner. So again, these are the sort of, realities that we all have to deal with in situations where, unfortunately, like a selling side doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And it's trying to manage that expectation for the buyers. And that's why whenever I talk to them about it, it's like, this is what we want, but this may not be what they're going to be agreeable to. And although we are right, that's what sucks. We may be right, but unfortunately we have to also deal with the, human side of the fact that we're negotiating with another party that wants to do things their way potentially.
Correct. Now, and why do you think, like, what's your recommendation to a buyer? Like, why should they actually conduct a final walkthrough?
Oh man, you just have to. You have to. You can't assume that people are going to do what they're supposed to do. You just can never assume that. You can never think that it's, I hate living in this part of like life where, I want to think the best in everybody, and that's always just my nature to do. But as an attorney, I have to also think about the risk associated with that thought, because if you're just going to assume that the parties on the other side are going to either flag for you something that they should be flagging for you, so you're not finding out the day you walk through. They should have, I already told you, look, my mover messed up. They bumped something into the wall, and now there's a hole. But then walking in, so if you don't walk in and see the issues, you have no recourse. So the contracts are clear that unless there is an amendment signed by the parties extending an obligation, the rights and responsibilities of the seller end at closing. So if you did not walk through, you went to closing, and then you find out after you have your keys, you go in and there's, a leak that you would have seen. That's your leak to deal with. The seller's not responsible. The deal is done. Now that's why we do holdbacks of money, and we have it pursuant to a signed document, a holdback agreement, because that is a document that is surviving the closing. So that keeps the sellers obligated to that issue. But yeah, I mean, if you have the ability to walk through, I can't imagine why you wouldn't have the ability to walk through, but I would postpone closing to make sure you can walk through. Another thing that we do sometimes for just scheduling, like sometimes people have a certain schedule and we run into these issues.
Do the day
One
of the
thing that
closing and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing we can do is sign with them, not record anything,
Yeah.
then go to the walkthrough after, especially in a situation where maybe the house is actually closer to their home than our office. We sign with them, then they go walk through, they call us, say, yeah, everything looks good, and then we submit the documents for recording. We can also do that if it's a scheduling issue. But definitely you have to walk through.
Yeah. And I've seen that, because I think what we see often as brokers is we schedule the final walkthrough. And I think that this is where buyers and sellers are a little bit confused on technically when are the sellers supposed to leave the property and when is a buyer supposed to have a final walkthrough? Because too often do we see the buyers do the final walkthrough, the sellers are still living there, or they are not fully moved out. They still have some equipment or furniture or, junk and trash left behind. And, because I think this buyer believes that when they do the final walkthrough, the seller has to have moved out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of a little bit of conflict because technically, right, seller has up until we close
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
vacate that property. So I do believe that your, you know, advice on that to conduct the final walkthrough, expect that it's going to be in the same condition as it was when we first made the offer and had the home inspection. But if you run into the problem, right, where the seller still has items left, maybe don't record until we run back for a second time
100%.
to make sure that it is completely empty. Because if you say go ahead, close, sign, record, you own whatever's left behind.
And sometimes we have buyers who are like, because also you as a buyer can't access this property until we are on record. So sometimes we find on a Friday afternoon, the seller still has some stuff, but the
Yeah.
buyers want to move in over the weekend. And so what happens then? So we've had buyers who say, you know what, the stuff that remains, we're cool with. Like, we know that they're going to get it out. We met them at the house. They're nice people. They're going to do the right thing. The realtor on the other side is, highly regarded too and has a great reputation. Submit it for recording.
Yeah.
Because we want to move in.
Yeah.
Other situation could be that, and again, this is so case by case, because it could be that it's literally just like trash outside that's left for the garbage truck and the garbage truck hasn't arrived yet,
Yeah.
So it really just depends on the issue. And that's why we have sort of in our tool belt the different options: postponing, recording, holdback of money, or the credit itself, where the holdback is helpful too, especially if there's a large amount of stuff that's still remaining, but we still want to make it on record. That way we kind of accomplish both things.
Do we have when we talk about holdback from final walkthrough, is there a specific dollar amount that you would legally represent or give an advice or suggest for a
Yeah.
buyer to do?
So yeah, so I'm a very collaborative attorney. So I, rely a lot on the expertise of the agents and also their vendors. A lot of them have, their junk person or whatever. But I always think that whatever we get in terms of like a quote to remove stuff, we should probably be asking for 1.5 times that. We do that for other things. Like if we have to hold back money for a septic system, for example, it's a 1.5 times. I feel like that 1.5 times is pretty standard and acceptable from attorney standpoints. But the question is sometimes too, we're walking through at 9 a.m., closing's at 11. How are we going to get a contractor's word back on how much it's going to cost to remove? So sometimes it's about, the history of having seen this before and that expertise, and just kind of figuring out an amount that seems reasonable too. But I think the 1.5 times the cost, or the presumed cost, is usually the best way to go to be extra safe. Because at the end of the day, if the seller does what they're supposed to do, they're going to get the money quickly. So that's sort of where we usually try to steer clients, is the 1.5 times.
And what do you as an attorney advise clients? We all understand and know they obviously need to have a final walkthrough. Is there something specifically as a legal perspective that a buyer needs to look for at the final walkthrough?
So it's interesting because I think that I think some people assume, a walkthrough, and it just depends on the client too and the type of property. There's so many nuances. But if you think about like what somebody did in an inspection, what an inspector did, how they tested things, I think that there has to be a little bit of that. You're opening all the faucets, you're flushing the toilets, you're, trying to run the dishwasher, things like that. So some people a lot, like literally 5 minutes. They're gonna like literally walk through and see anything visible, but I still think that you need to like turn on the stove, you know, all those things that you're gonna be doing once you buy the property anyway. Might as well just take the extra time and kind of go through it a little bit more methodically.
Yeah, and I agree with that because I think too often buyers think they walk in and they just see an empty rooms and they go great.
Yeah.
But it really comes to, you know, for us, we try to guide them to say, you really got to check the mechanicals,
Yeah.
right? Check the windows, open the windows,
Yeah.
run the water, you know, check the stove, the fridge. And another thing that I find that a lot of people do not check is the doors. Does the door close? Does it lock? Because like, it depends if you're closing in the summer or in the winter. And when
Right.
did you, I mean, you might have been under agreement for 4 months before you,
Right.
does the heat work? You know, these are the things that I think, because it's such a large expense that when they close,
Yeah.
this is their problem if something were to break.
Exactly. We are a buyer beware state. So
Yeah.
you
We are.
if you're taking on that responsibility, really, right? You're assuming it once you close, you might, what's 5, 10, 15 more minutes to just do it the right way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's the one thing, buyers can't be pushed. You know, if a listing agent is in a rush, it's legally the buyer has the right to walk through and inspect everything in the property to making sure that it's in the same condition as it was when we first saw it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with
that. Well, this has been fantastic. And I think that this has been wonderful as far as giving all this information for the buyers. And I think it's just so important. Buyer needs to understand, reach out to their attorney, reach out to the broker.
Yeah.
Lean on us because we are here to help and guide you guys.
Yes, we are your guides. You know, this is what we do every single day. So
not the tour guide, but we are a guide.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Annelie. I appreciate this. And we'll be chatting soon on another topic, hopefully in the next couple of days. So thank you guys for tuning in and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great.